Apna Course. Get smart, get ahead.
Hi, welcome to the PMI-ACP course offered by ApnaCourse, a product offering from Spearhead Edu Online Private Limited. My name is Venkatraman. You can call me shortly Venkat. I do have close to around 14 plus years of experience in IT industry. I have been working on Agile methodologies as the primary, methodology of execution, planning, and everything for the last 9+ years. I moved from the traditional way of doing it way back in 2005. I was fortunate enough to jump onto the Agile way of doing it, and I've been completely loving it. I have pretty good experience on extreme programming. I do have a good amount of hands-on experience on Scrum and Agile coaching, primarily for small and medium teams, right from web development, product development, and ad networks and ad platforms. I've also been the head of project management in my recent role, which also means that I do have a delivery role, primarily managing 100+ releases using Agile. I believe in the T concept of going the breadth as well as the depth, which means I've been pretty much working with the teams in enabling Agile, Scrum, and coaching. At the same time, I've also been the delivery side of it. So it's been a multifaceted role for me. And okay, that's just more or less the introduction about me. I am a PMI member. I'm a PMI ACP certified PMP, PMI risk management, PMI RMP. I'm also a safe agilist from the Scaled Academy. I've done my CSM and CSP. Apart from it, from a governance perspective, I'm also a COBIT 5 and CGIT professional. So conferences and certifications are my forte, and I am looking forward to be one of the proponents of Agile in the industry. So that's the introduction about me, and today's content is going to be about Agile methodologies, primarily about understanding what's Agile. So everybody is saying, let's move on to Agile, or let's do Agile, let's be Agile. There's a big difference between being Agile and doing Agile. So we'll talk about it. So we will look at what an Agile methodology is all about. Now, before we look at what Agile methodology is, we will have to look at the list of topics that we're going to cover today. Fundamentally, as to why Agile, why not continue with the typical traditional way of doing things? What about the Agile manifesto? What is the Agile manifesto? And then Agile principles, and we will move on to the. We will look at how the manifesto and principles have been drafted to be able to take a good sense of what the Agile Consortium is trying to kind of convey. These are a couple of legends used in the slides: high importance and key takeaway notes. If you find them, they are very important. Now let's look at why Agile, right? So before we look at why Agile, we need to understand there is as is to be, or there is a way we're going towards a particular destination. So why not be in the same path as we are doing before? So let's analyze a little bit on the traditional project management. So typically a project manager is tasked with a scope of work. We call it statement of work, SOW. So far the way it has been is the project manager is tasked with the SOW. He or she tries to come up with the work breakdown structure. It's a pretty waterfallish way of doing it, saying there is a requirements phase and the requirement sign off happens at the end of the phase. There is an architectural phase where the high level architecture, HLDs, and everything is put through. There's a design phase where the low level designs and everything has been the design patterns and what kind of scalability things we would use and everything else. So we will kind of look at both the architecture and design in separate phases. Then we'll get into development based on the design, based on how we want to kind of do it. There's a development phase, then there is a complete testing phase, which throws bugs back into the development if there are anything found. Then comes back to the UAT, where user acceptance testing is where most of the bugs get unearthed, and all the way it traces back to something to do with a design bug or an architectural level bug. So the way this triangle is very, very common for everybody, which is you have a scope which is fixed. We also talk about freezing scope. That's the waterfall way of doing it, saying we'll freeze scope. We need to freeze scope. So that's frozen. we will then look at trying to find out what's the time it would take, which is the duration of the work, and what's the cost. The cost is primarily to do with how much billing would need to be done for this particular person. So a team of 7 or some 8 will be formed, where there's a project manager, there's a project lead, two project leads. One is a dev lead, one is a QA lead, and then you have 3 people under them and 3 people under them, and then you can expand it to a 20-member team and make it as a big team also. So there's a cost is going to be the dollar per hour multiplied by who's going to be what's the billing rates and things like that, and then you're going to be eventually arriving at the project cost. You're going to be having infrastructure costs, you're going to be having a couple of other costs, risk mitigation costs, a lot of other things will be put out together, and this will be derived saying, hey, this project will be delivered in 280 days, or probably saying, say let's take a small one, saying 120 days, and this is the cost of it. So this is typically how it has been. And then for any change that comes in between, we go and fight back and say, no, this change cannot be accommodated. We already have scope for it. Right now it's too late in the design, too late in the system to kind of do it. Now that's not how the entire world is operating, right? Things are very, very rapidly changing. There's going to be quite a bit of competitors who are kind of making changes overnight. So as a person who's responsible for the product, you want some changes in the product to be done so that you can beat the competition even before they can go to the market. Let's assume the competitor is coming out with something in September, and then your timeline says you could kind of meet all your stuff in July, August. But then you don't have that particular feature in the product. And now since that the scope is fixed and time and cost is the only variable thing you have, you try to kind of negotiate on saying, hey, I need to kind of try to kind of get this particular feature inside. What would be the requirement change that needs to be done? Then you raise its change request. A lot of these things happen. That's the typical traditional project management. Now there's been nothing wrong in it. I mean, primarily that has worked in many of the projects. So typical thing is the requirements, as we talked about in the last slide itself, the requirements, then it flows to architecture, to design, and everything has a clear-cut gated criteria. And then many times that there could be a bug all the way from the UAT stage and goes trace backs to design. It's not just goes to test and test to dev and design. So it might come and say, how did it miss tests? How did it miss the testing phase? How did dev not code it? So there will be a lot of these back and forth that's typically happening. And then this duration, let's take some numbers, right? 120 days. The requirements could be like 15 day of a period, and architecture would be another 25 days. That's too high. So let's take 15. Design is another 20 days. Dev would be like 40 days, and test is like some 15 days. It always gets crunched. Though you budget for it, developers will eat up the previous cascading effects on all this. Test will get crunched because you can't meet the time. So they work, they are the persons who always get the thrashing typically. And at the UAT end, you kind of find a lot of bugs. The customer is unhappy, and this waterfall keeps falling. So this is the typical way how we're looking at what. So what is traditional project management all over? It's focused on the scope of work that needs to be frozen. Assumes, this is a very important thing that I want to kind of stress on, is like it assumes that upfront planning, which is in detail, can mitigate all the risks. So you spend a lot of good deal of time in doing upfront planning all the way up till UAT and even post acceptance and things like that. And the assumption is that all problems have been well defined at the start. So everybody knows what needs to be done for the next 120 days. Then phase N+1, which is test begins only after dev begins only after design. All the stuff really happens. Customer touch points happen at milestones. So there is going to be a customer meeting on the 15th of every month, and that's when the milestones are being chalked out, and then that's when the billing happens. You have a quick call and say, hey, we've kind of, either we are not there, and the student syndrome kicks in. From 7th to 15th is when teams really thrash out and kind of put something up for the customer. There might not be any artifact for that matter, right? Till the development begins, only the design artifacts, the documents are reviewed and things like that. So the customer is also like looking at certain things and says, okay, things are going fine, but nobody knows whether things are going really fine. So that's the typical thing. And the real value of the product is available only at the end of the life cycle. Typically at the testing time is when somebody really has an artifact in hand. And the cost of change, as we saw, is pretty high, because finding a defect in the testing stages is pretty costly. That too, especially if it's a design bug, because it has to go and check where the traceability is getting affected, what other modules are getting affected. You have to do testing for all those modules, and you have to go move forward. Now, this is where, not that Agile is a silver bullet for it. Now, but then there is hope. There is always a good sense of understanding that most of it is people problem. Most of it is people not having something to give feedback on. Most of it has got to do with uh, not meeting frequently, leaving it for milestones and leaving it for certain timelines to really take care of it. So, and the client is also not very much aware of what's happening till the time he or she really gets to see things in UAT or in pre-prod, as the environment we call it. So Agile is a methodology that came into existence or has been proposed as a primary change agent for how do we will deliver software very frequently, how we will deliver working software frequently. So we look at all those manifestos and principles, which has actually been the core, the core stuff behind Agile. Agile is an empirical process control methodology. When we say empirical, it's more to do with there is a feedback loop, there's a control system that's going to be there. It believes that the requirements are bound to change, which is very natural. But you go buy something, you have something in the mind that you want a fridge, a refrigerator at home, and then as and when we kind of land there, we find 3 or 4 more designs. So there's a visual appeal to certain things, and you kind of go change your mind. You don't go fight there saying, hey, we discussed it at home, we're not going to change it anymore. Just that we will look at it there saying, hey, this has all that we wanted, plus this has certain things. Okay, I'll kind of take it. So these requirements are bound to change as they are more explored and made visible. That's the most important thing. It focuses on people, communications, and early failures and success. And it's based on 3 fundamental values of transparency, frequent inspection, and adaptation. So it's called adaptation. So there's a typo there. So there's a transparency, frequent inspection, and adaptation. So which means to say there is a clear-cut understanding of transparency is about having the gut, having the will to kind of share something out, which is I'm working on something, here is what I'm working on. So here's what my status is. Making it extremely visible than hiding it behind milestones is what the typical transparency is. And you frequently inspect and adapt in terms of how things are changing. Maybe it's not the way we need to do it and things like that. So these are the core fundamentals on which Agile is based on. And adjustments are made at short intervals. We call it iterations or sprints in Agile. We'll look at it in the further modules. If you look at it, the entire focus is around delivery of business value and everything is tied around it. Now, what does it mean? It means that scope is all fine, but then if it doesn't add any value to the user, that scope is totally useless. So you might be even developing something for 120 days, but the customer is just not happy with it because he has not got even a single money out of it. Maybe he did not even understand what the team was building, or the team did not understand what the customer wanted. All specs were nice, everything was pretty cool, but then nobody really had something visually given or touch and feel tangible that the customer can kind of give a feedback or be able to sense, because we believe that everything is upfront planned and everything is understood very well in advance. So those are the things that we need to ensure that's been stopped. Let's look at the agile project management in a very different way. Now, we saw this triangle completely inverted in the previous case of traditional way, where there is a scope that's fixed, there's time and cost that's going to be variable. So how do we kind of manage that in case of Agile? In case of Agile, things are a little different, where you don't scope box, you time box, which means time's fixed. Either it could be 2 week or a 3 week short sprints or short iterations, we call it. The cost is nothing but the cost of the resources. How many people are there in the team? What's their billing rates? What's the number of hours that these teams put in and things like that. Based on this, the question is, what is the timeline or what is the scope? The question is, what can you deliver in 10 days or what can you deliver in 15 days? That's the typical question. And then this drives to a point saying we can deliver these things, but tell me whether these are priority. So Agile looks at it very, very differently. This is just an inverted triangle which talks about time is fixed, cost is fixed. What's your scope? What according to you can be really done in terms of this particular time frame? And if it's of high value for the customer is expected to kind of pick those items that he or she wants as a scope, and the teams commit to saying yes, they will be able to deliver it or they will not be able to deliver it. If you look at it, both of them now put together the same page. If you look at it there, its scope is fixed, time and cost is variable. Here, time and cost is fixed and scope is variable. So it's just an inverted triangle. If this particular thing comes into the mind, this is much more beneficial to understand how a time boxed iterations or time boxed working sessions are good enough, or are the way how Agile operates in terms of how deliveries are happening every 10 days or every 15 days. And we will look at various Agile methodologies in the upcoming session. They're called Agile flavors. There's a session on Agile flavors which talks about how this is being taken care by methodologies such as Scrum, which talks about having a backlog, and the scope is actually defined out of that backlog. The entire scope of the product is your backlog, and then the teams look at what's the time of 10 days. This is a cost that we're going to incur. This is the scope out of the backlog. We call it the sprint backlog that we want to kind of take it up. This is the typical representation of how a triangle gets solved. There is a variant of this by Jim Smith, who talks about the three, instead of it, we call the time, cost, and the scope, time and cost. He talks about business value, quality, which is a given, which has to be there as part of it, and the rest of the constraints. So it's called the iron triangle, or the iron triangle of Jim Smith, which talks about the three pillars, which is business value, quality, and the constraints that we operate with, which is cost, scope, and schedule. That's the more or less the overview of Agile.
Apna course. Get smart. Get ahead.